Florida.
Great. That's wonderful.
It was, but it's the end of an era.
Right. So you're moving out of
This was a vacation place that I had with my ex-husband.
okay, okay. Right.
And this is where I became president. I was president of this place for a while, which was a
Wow.
lot of fun.
Fun?
Of like
Well,
the
it was.
neighborhood?
No, but I think I told you in the past, what happened is when I moved in, I don't want to talk too loud, people could hear me, but they know the story anyway. The board that was running it, they were corrupt. Well, the board didn't even know what was going on, but the property manager was corrupt. They had set up false companies for assessments. I mean, they did a lot of really bad things. And at first, nobody believed me. I was the troublemaker from New York. So it was an adventure that I took with two other women to really get other people to see what was going on. And it was fun. It was like an action movie.
Yeah. So then you became like the president of the neighborhood, or was it like the
Just of the building.
building?
It was just of the
Yeah.
building, but a lot of conflict negotiation skills went into it, especially after, and creating friendships. I was just talking to somebody downstairs that I didn't know. I was walking the dog. He was just saying there hasn't been a meeting here in like a really long time. They don't know each other again. So, I haven't been here. I stepped down a while ago.
Okay, okay. Oh, looks like the weather's beautiful there. Pretty
It is
warm
so
in
nice.
Florida.
But you know what? It's comfortable. Like I just came back from walking the dog. I didn't even want to come inside. He just like laid down on the grass because it's not super hot. I mean, it's, the high 70s, but with a nice breeze off the water.
Is that a
Yeah.
canal right outside the condo unit?
Yes.
Here in
And then the
Norway,
beach
it's
is
really
like a half
cold.
mile. Is it cold?
Yeah,
It was
here
cold
it's
in New
really
York.
cold. Yeah.
34 here in suburban Boston.
What I don't like about using my phone is I can only see 3 of you at a time.
Ah, right. Yeah, that's right.
But Colin and Sam aren't on camera anyway, so.
It's like that with the iPad as well. Yeah. Here I'm having a different computer, so the camera's sort of down. So it's sort of looking up at me. It looks weird, but it's like I'm really tall or something. Sam is waking up. Hey.
I wonder, does anybody have a topic? Is he putting anything in the chat? Sam, do you want us to hold off? People of the lie.
As you can tell, I probably look like I just woke up. And
Did I wake you with my call?
yes,
Good,
Yeah,
I was
hair
hoping
is
to.
awesome. Look at his hair.
Did you just
That
have a
hair
dream
is-
have a cat fight in your dream or something?
this is what it's like when you got, this kind of hair and don't care what you look like. So sorry I'm late. You guys are obviously free to talk about whatever you want. I can pull up my notes because I always take notes during the week about what to talk about, but you guys are welcome to do whatever you like. Anyway, actually, if anybody wants to be moderator and focuser, it's completely okay with me too. I'm still gathering myself.
Well, I can't because I'm going off camera and I'm going to be listening. And actually, I'll do that now.
So. Here we go. I found my Saturday notes. My GCC Saturday. Ah, good. Okay, good. I put 3 links in my notes. I'm going to paste them in here. Here's link number 1. Why is this so long? Geez, what an ugly link. Oh, because it's a Facebook link. Sorry. Here's a second link. And here's a third link. Now I have to remind myself to put those links in here. Anyway, one is the Lakota Code of Ethics. Another is the Science News Cycle. And another is the Epicurean God Paradox.
You know, you can chop those at the question mark. You don't have to have the part after the / question mark. You can just leave that out.
Yeah. I just didn't, usually when I do this, I just leave those links for myself and then find a better way to work them into the conversation. But right now, I'm just blasting them in there because I'm late.
You know, Sam, I do have something that I could bring up if you need a few more minutes.
Can I make you moderator and host?
I don't want to take on that responsibility because as I explained when you were off, I have to start cleaning out stuff. At my place in Florida, we closed and I have the job all by myself to clean it out. So right now I'm just taking a little break to sit outside, but then I have to go in. You'll have 90% of my attention, but not 100.
I just want to say that I'm probably going to have to leave at 9 because I have to deliver this, which I'm making right now.
Actually, so let me do a little bit of check-in. I apologize for being late because I was actually in a new bedroom because I got a new bedroom set this week. And I haven't set up all my reminders, Alexas, clocks, whatever. And my phone was not sufficiently charged. And I don't know, for whatever reason, I didn't wake up on my own like around 5 or 6, as I sometimes do. So that's my excuse for being late. But it's actually a different locale that I'm in within the home. Sorry about that. Okay, in fact, I'm going to send to the barn raising group a picture of the bedroom set. I mean, I very rarely splurge on things. I'm a cheap ass bastard, as most of you know. But on this one thing, I've actually been eyeing this bedroom set for at least 5 years. So I wanted to just send you a little picture of what my bedroom looks like right now. I just got the bed set up on Wednesday, okay? And I'm still trying to equip the room with the other accoutrement. Let me do that right now. I'm going to take myself off camera. I'm going to share a link. Stacy can present the topic, okay? Stacy, your topic, please.
Okay, well, so I just wanted to mention a post that I think, I know Heiner and Barry were on because it brings up an issue that always intersects in terms of the truth. So the post I'm talking about was where a gentleman speculated about the reason for 360 degrees in a circle. Heiner and Barry, nod if you know what I'm talking about.
Larry Eli, I think,
See
was
Barry.
the poster.
Okay, yes. So again, I didn't follow I read through the whole thing. I didn't really see how the point was drawn, but that was neither here nor there. But what struck me is the idea of taking a story and using that as evidence to weigh your case. So I put in the chat my story because without any factual evidence, if I were looking for factual evidence, I would start with my story. So the whole idea is, why is one story more valuable as a starting point to start looking for proof? Again, so like I said, I didn't get into the math, but I do feel strong. So the whole idea was with 360. So for me, what's very significant about the number 360 is that, you know, 6 is high, and 6 squared is something that we see a lot in the Jewish tradition. And 10 is symbolic for a lot of reasons. Again, not proof of anything, but my point is, why is there a dominant voice that sort of shines a light and say, okay, people over here, let's look in this direction, when there may be another direction to look? So I don't know if I articulated the problem well enough. Barry, you might want to add something, but I just think it's, you know, it's what we face every day. I think that type of, the whole idea of a more powerful voice and a less powerful voice in terms of numbers. I mean, numbers of people voicing it, not numbers. I'm complete.
One of my favorite quotes comes from the late Umberto Eco. And the quote, which appears on the book jacket of one of his books, is, whereof we cannot express a theory, we must narrate a story instead. And God bless, some people love stories and they don't particularly love theories. So we have lots and lots of narratives which are stand-ins for theories that have not yet been constructed or articulated or understood. And in science, eventually in science, a theory emerges, but it emerges after there's already one or more narratives out there that tries to explain the same thing. And it's very hard to overthrow a narrative that's been in the culture for decades or centuries or millennia. And it's also very hard to understand a theory because theories are often not expressed in a narrative form. They're expressed in a mathematical or scientific or analytical form. And there aren't a lot of people who will sit down and digest and understand a theory. They love their narratives.
So my question is, was there something that, because I didn't understand the math, was there something to what he was saying that made sense? And that is, oh yeah, everybody knows this. And it was just that because I don't have the knowledge, I didn't get it.
But you have to understand that Larry Eli is a big fan of astrology and the zodiac and mysticism and all of these pre-scientific versions of explaining all the patterns we see in the sky and why there's 12 months in the year and, you know, essentially 12 cycles of the moon in a year and 12 stories and 7 moving objects in the sky, which turn into deities and stories. So he's really into this storycraft version of explanation, which date back to the dawn of civilization. And those of us like me who are just, you know, very mathematical and scientific, we appreciate these stories, but we don't rely on them as deep understandings. So, you know, I kind of tolerate him. I mean, there's nothing really wrong with, you know, enjoying mysticism and astrology and tarot and all that kind of stuff. Stories are useful up to a point. And then at some point you want to say, I want a more precise understanding of reality, a more mathematical or analytical understanding. And when I say that, a lot of people say, well, okay, Barry, have a nice day. We'll talk to you later.
If I could just add though, I'm not against that kind, you know, looking at things that way. And in fact, I was doing exactly the same thing with what I said. I was doing exactly what he was doing. I was looking for different significance. And that's what I'm saying. I have no problem with the story being a starting point, but who gets to decide the story? That's what I'm saying. Like you said, the number 10 is very significant. We have 10 fingers.
Right.
Like maybe somebody got it wrong way back and they focused on the wrong number because they didn't understand that maybe instead of 12, maybe it's 1 and 2, which is 3. And I'm just, you know, I'm just rambling, but.
There's
I
a
think you
reason
get, I
why-
hope you
there's-
get my point.
There's a reason why we
Guess you're
sell
not seeing
products.
hands up, guys.
What?
I have my hand
Pam
up.
has a hand up.
Oh, I'm
yeah.
sorry, I
Yeah.
can't hear anything. I'm done. I can't see anything, I mean. Go ahead, Sam.
I'm going to ask a pokey question. I'm curious whether this topic has relevance and supports what you think the mission of barn raising is, or GCC at least.
Who's you? Who are you asking?
You, Stacy, you're the proposer of this particular topic.
Yes, so the reason that I think it's relevant is because every single day we come into contact with people that have different opinions, and we're looking for ways to co-create and make decisions together. And so I'm going to the origin of when we first get this idea in our head and we don't have proof for anything, but we decide which path we're going to go on. And first of all, I asked the question just because there were people here that had observed it, and I wanted to know, maybe because I acknowledge that I don't have some of the math knowledge, maybe that there was a lot there and I was just missing it, which made me less likely to speak up, because who am I to speak up against mathematicians? But so then as I heard a little bit more, I realized that that really wasn't the case. So the way it feeds into learning how to communicate better, I'm kind of focused on what voices we hear and how easy or hard it is for people to speak up and all those things. So in some way, yeah, I mean, I think it affects everything. So that's my answer.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate that. That connects it for me, okay?
Thank
And
you.
since you did ask the question, I'm going to keep going since I have my hand up, because I know Heiner's got his hand up as well. Because when you raised the question, I did a search, why the circle has 360 degrees. And I read the first article. It has 4 or 3 potential reasons. And quite frankly, I find all of those reasons implausible. So I'm not really clear myself. Now, since you guys are talking about story, I could propose a story and it has no basis in anything, okay? But my response is circles used everywhere, okay? And one of the places is to keep track of time, because one of the reasons in this particular article was, hey, the year has 365 days. Maybe that has some bearing with 360 degrees in a circle. And I said, that sounds like bullshit to me, okay? I mean, it could be very, very likely, but 360 does not equal 365. So where do you even get that connection from? And I'm thinking, if you're really tracking time, and if you take a day, and if you actually eat, if you sleep, you probably want to split a day into 2, right? So you at least have 2 degrees or 2 measures for a circle if you're actually trying to use circles to track days. Now, if you eat, and if you eat twice a day, while the day is bright, okay, then you take the daytime and you split that in 2, okay? You can say this is meal number 1 time, this is meal number 2 time, and now the circle has 4 parts. If you eat 3 times a day, then you want to take the daytime and you will split into 3 times. This is the meal number 1, number 2, number 3. Then if you flip it and say, okay, there's the other half where we're sleeping, now you got 6, okay? But on the other hand, if you actually track how long it takes to eat, for some reason, if you go to a restaurant, you get a reservation, typically, on the average, people eat about an hour. Strangely, it seems like to me, okay? With the socialization, with the pleasantries, whatever. So if you do that, then you sort of say, oh, geez, we don't take the entire 1/3 of this time, we take, half of it. Now, if you track that, now you got 12 of those parts of a circle during the daylight hours, and then you flip it around to the sleeping part, you got 12 more there, so there's 24. So I can sort of see bases for each of these numbers. So to me, a circle needs to be, if we're using it in a time tracking sequence, it needs to be factorizable by all these easy numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, whatever, okay? So you could actually say 12 is a good number, 24 is a good number, all of these different factors are good numbers. 60 turns out to have all of those components, okay? And then if you split that up again, split each of those into 6, 360 has, so anyway, there's a bunch of bullshit stuff I could come up with, okay? that says, hey, maybe here's another reason. And to me, that's actually more based on arithmetic than some of these other reasons that I see. Anyway, so I'm done bullshitting. There's no reason for anybody to believe any of this, but I read these things in this article. I'm going to paste the link into the chat, by the way. And I said, man, I could come up with at least as good a reason as what I'm reading here. Okay, so here's the article. And it's actually from a place called Science ABC. Now, I may be just, waking up, not actually putting on my polite hat yet. So I'm just being an asshole right now. But anyway, that was my reaction from reading that particular article. So I'm going to relinquish the floor to Heiner now, since I spoke way too long already. Bye.
Yes, thank you. I think the question you raised is very central. It is who is first and who sets the tone. And when you asked that question, I immediately thought about the generative kernel, the impulse to start a conversation. Maybe someone of you has heard about Francisco Gutierrez. He was education minister of Costa Rica and all over South America. And his approach to a group was trying, wherever you start in a conversation, it is that you pick up the original generative kernel, and out of this, you develop a conversation. That's my first remark to Stacy. Second, I was in this chat with Eli about the circle and 360 degrees. And I talked with him a lot about rhythmical measurement schemes and traditions and how cultures have been building through the ages. And so I like his approach, and his approach is very pragmatic. And 360 is very good to make 4s and 6s and 10s and 12s. But I told him, you see, there's another pragmatic approach to say a circle has 400 degrees, as I learned more than 40 years ago. We surveyors decide that the circle has 400 degrees and 400 minutes and 400 seconds. And through that, we can also calculate very easily. And we have 6 or 8 times or whatever the precision. And I was playing with him saying, how about 400,000 parts in a circle? And how, if we not only take parts of the circle, of the round, but of the third dimension, the nadir, you say, the height, when you find out the position of a star, that all these are pragmatic approaches, and they are all very good and bad and relevant and historic and culturally and whatever biased. 360 is very good, but it's not the only solution. Maybe 400 or 10,000 is another alternative. I just want to really show it is the essence of our group here. What are we keeping as truth, and who is dominating how many parts is in a circle or in a ball? So you see, you come into very critical questions when you think about a round sphere or whatever, a torus or other bodies. Anyway, Stacy, I like your questions. Over.
Thank you. Yeah, and I just wanted to add that one of the part of what was interesting to me in that conversation and when I got involved was when he started looking towards the Bible, because that's really what I'm more interested in, about the different interpretations. So again, just wanted to clear that up.
I just wonder, doesn't this kind of depend a little bit about what one wants to achieve, sort of what the purpose is of being there? I think I can't really understand how could answer that question without knowing something about why the question is asked. You know what I mean?
I didn't understand your question, Glenn.
Well, I'm saying if you ask the question, what story should go first, or why should this interpretation be better than the other one, doesn't that depend on the purpose of asking the question?
Yeah,
So I can give you my answer, Glenn. The reason these questions are interesting to me is because I'm looking for what hidden messages may be out there for human beings to live in a life of harmony. And if these, the Bible stories or other stories were written to teach us something, like how Barry says, make good art, maybe they were making good art. I'd like to, first of all, find out what the numbers in it mean. And they may not be what we've been told they meant. A bunch of men decided that. So I like to look at things with a fresh perspective and just say, well, how about if we play with this? And actually, it turns out that both are right. So like when I hear people talking about, well, whatever, I don't want to go into it, but when I play with the numbers and I take all the different stories, they all work.
Right. So the purpose is harmonious existence, basically.
For me,
Yeah,
I can't.
for me
anybody.
too, actually. Yeah, I can relate with that purpose.
I like that purpose. I'm going to go next since I have my hand raised up. And for me, if I enlarge the question, it is what conventions seem to be globally accepted? So 360, it could be one of those conventions. But if I ask, why are we living with certain conventions? Then that could get to some of these questions that have been follow-up questions, like, how did the story work? What affected what decision? How did it propagate to the entire world? And so my similar questions are, why are there 24 hours in a day? Similarly, why are there 7 days in a week? And why are streets, the width of 2 horses, etc., or lanes at least, the width of 2 horses, which lead to, the width of railroad tracks, and which leads to how highways get built, which leads to how wide cars are, which leads to how wide garages are, etc., etc., etc. So those are also seemingly universal agreements made in some way. So those questions, those agreements, those conventions that seem to have universal acceptance. There may be, different practices here and there, but mostly universal. To me, represent similar questions. How did those stories come up? How do we decide to adopt these? How do they then propagate? How do they make impacts on other phenomena that kind of then lose the origin of those decisions, and that we continue to live with? Over. And Colin's got his hand up.
Yeah, I was always interested in Stacy's take on hidden knowledge. And I don't have a problem with that. So that's usually, I think, the way it's taken, that I have a problem. So I'll just say first off, I don't have a problem with that. Knowledge is hidden. We wonder about things. And actually, I think knowledge is what you actually know. So maybe you're just saying information is hidden to gain knowledge. But you start quibbling over these definitions, and Barry can appreciate this. When you start to talk about these details at a scientific level, then the real definitions start to get split into hairs. And it's important because you're actually trying to say what you think might be better. So if nobody takes you seriously, it doesn't really matter. But as you get taken more seriously and have more influence, people start to take apart your words to find out what your intention is. And if it's hidden information, we should be very concerned about this process. And what I'm saying is people who have a strong emotional attachment to the idea that this information is hidden may try to push it through the process with more confidence than it deserves. Now, I understand protecting it, so you may have an opportunity to have it heard and assessed and possibly steel manned to make sure that both people understand each other. But it's very difficult when somebody has emotion and they want to throw that on the pile too. And I find that is the religious faith effect in general with people who are very convinced that they have a deity, that they will throw that extra thing on. Not all. I don't even know how many, but it's enough that it's a risk that you shouldn't do it, whoever you are. And if you have no influence, then no harm, no foul. But if you do have influence, like Mike Pence, and I'm proposing he might be a dominionist, then he might think there's all kinds of hidden knowledge out there that his deity is trying to give him to bring to the government. Or maybe Mike Pence will just use it as personal, a personal way to reflect on himself, and then leave that out of his decisions in a secular way. So I guess we have to be careful about levels of confidence, using emotion as reason, and it's in that domain that I find there's risk. So I think Glenn has a really good idea about making sure we behave appropriately so that we can at least try to steel man and understand each other appropriately. And then one has to decide how much time they can put into it, because it's going to cost effort to do this, right? Even one sentence, Barry said he could spend a long time just parsing the first 3 words of the sentence. So, it depends on the stake, and having the charity to see from another point of view or another worldview. And emotion can block people from trying on the shoe on another foot, you could say. So I don't know. Yeah, go ahead, Glenn.
Okay. Yeah. Well, if the purpose is a good life, if that's the underlying factor, can be certain kinds. Question is there knowledge that's been handed over between generations that relate to a good quality of life, maybe a stable society, maybe psychological, spiritual health, or processes of growth? And has this knowledge been handed down, and has it been coded into some of the myths? I guess those are some of the questions that seem relevant. And another term that came to me was this term that I heard recently. Forget his name. One of those Canadian psychologists. It's not Jordan Peterson, it's someone else. But he had a conversation with Jordan Peterson, and he mentions this concept of participatory knowledge as contrasted with represented knowledge. And so he says that there's often a misunderstanding between people who speak about participatory knowledge and those who are concerned with represented knowledge. So when Barry talks about a theory, that would be an example of represented knowledge. But participatory knowledge would be something where it is the act of participation in something that brings about the kind of knowledge that's needed. And then what's been suggested by several people, also Jordan Peterson spoken about it, many others, is that some of the ancient myths have more to do with something like participatory knowledge. So it's certain kinds of experiences that cannot be represented symbolically. So that's why they deliberately use the language of myth rather than the language of explanation. So, so that I guess that could be a few distinctions, could be useful to clear it up. So then I guess it ties back to this question of what the purpose is of the kind of knowledge, because there's certain processes, one could say, where representation is an obstacle. So that's why, or propositional knowledge, that's another expression, that propositional knowledge can have its place in certain situations. There can be other situations, like, let's say in an intimate relationship, there's certain situations where coming with a theory and a proposition is just gonna create trouble and barriers from participating in an experience. So I guess it all comes back to, again, what the purpose of the knowledge is. And then I guess we could say that we have many tools available for us, depending on the situation we're in and depending on what we want to achieve. That's a couple of things that come up for me with this. Did that make any sense to you? Yeah. Finished here, I think.
Did you hear what I just said? Probably not.
No, I didn't hear it. No.
Yeah, that clears it up somewhat, Glenn. I think you're talking about sources of information, and what I'm talking about is how do we ascertain if it's reliable information, which is a Barry phrase, right? Oh, you guys, I'm sorry, buddies. Okay, so
how do we know it's reliable?
Epistemology.
Yeah. So yeah, I had a interruption there. So the deal is if we're trying to ascertain if it's reliable information, right, then it's going to take work of some sort. And if there's bias involved, then that's a little bit of pre-work. And I call that framework adjustment. And I think that's really where Heiner's message has really struck me when he talks about multimodal, multi ways to see things, right? So, I can come off as arrogant because I might hold my beliefs too strongly. So I guess I really do like what Sam said, that we should have strong beliefs held loosely, right? That does make sense. But that means you can give the belief to somebody else to play with, and then you can take it back, right? Whatever. I guess it's when identity gets challenged and the person feels that their worth and their ego is being challenged. That's where the emotion comes up. Like, what's at stake? If this is true, what you're saying, you could propose, then that means I have to change the way I'm doing things. For example, I'll give you an example. If you have a non-theist who's having a problem they need some support with, okay? And they go to see a therapist who is actually somebody who has a belief or a faith in some kind of supernatural, you could say, knowledge that how do they filter out that bias or are they going to offer you that knowledge? And it's actually, I think, illegal to do so. So a Christian or politician or psychiatrist or psychologist, they all have to kind of leave their faith at the door. But do they really leave their faith at the door? And what does that conversation actually look like? Can the Christian person understand rationality from the atheist point of view? Or is the Christian person looking at the atheist as broken? And they can't say why they're broken, but they can give you all kinds of coping mechanisms and tools. But really what's going inside their head is you need God in your life, right? So this is what I'm talking about. When you have two different frameworks that come up together, how do you recognize the bias fairly so that a decision isn't made out of what somebody emotionally is saying is good information? And that comes down to evidence. And we get into a million terms at this point. What is knowledge? What is justified true belief? You know, there's a lot of things. And I'll just leave it there. I think it's a conundrum, and to think it's easy to explain something is a hard thing to do at a level where influence really matters, right? So I don't know. How do you draw that picture? How do you draw the frameworks? I think that's what Heiner tried to do. You know, when he made his cube, he tried to show the frameworks of different things coming together for another purpose. Anyway, I've talked a lot, but that's what really interests me. How do you deal with those biases fairly? Because we have them. Can't get away from them.
Alex has his hand up. Thanks, Colin. And then Stacy.
I'm not hearing Alex.
Yeah, Alex, if you're speaking, you're not coming through.
No, I'm not hearing Alex.
Yeah, I'm not hearing. the
Okay,
sound.
Stacy can go while Alex fixes his mic.
Yeah, good, because I want to answer Colin's question, because I don't think it's so much to do with the subject as it is to do with the person you're talking to and their ability to be neutral for all subjects. So like for me personally, I probably would not go to a therapist that doesn't believe that there's something greater out there, just because I know I'm not going to find answers for me that are going to be within my framework. But at the same time, I would not go to somebody that was so dogmatic. But I don't think how neutral or how unbiased somebody is specifically is determined based on whether or not they believe in God and how they see that God, whether they see it as nature or laws or a figure. It's not, for me, it's less about what they believe and more about how strongly their beliefs play a role in how they can discuss things. I'm complete.
Yeah, that's the biasm, right? We got to recognize it. Yeah, somehow.
I got this impression that there's a negative and a positive, or when in the yin and yang symbol, there's a spot that's black and a spot that's white. It's like having two extremes of the pendulum. In my pendulum example, there's a medium in the middle where it's balanced, and that's where the area where the bias is removed. It's the best place to see the views from both extremes, the balanced viewpoint. So if your pendulum is up one end, says God is real, you must get converted, or it's up the other end, it says evolution is the only answer, there's no God, then those are the two extremes, and they're both extremely biased. So come to the center and balance yourself and understand that there's more to the picture than meets the eye. Look at the pie chart of spiritualists, believers in the world, as opposed to atheists, and you find on the pie chart, the big section of the cake is 75%. Have a spiritual belief in some kind of magic or woo-woo, if you like to use those words, but I just call it higher thinking capacity, using your heart connected with your brain so that your emotions are not disregarded and people experience less sorrow in their life, more meaning and more love. Over.
Thanks, Alex. Again, I'm going to speak without filters here. If you present perspectives and if you present frameworks and you define the dimensions and you define what is extreme, that in itself is a framework. And if you take it as such, then it's a fair conversation. If you take it as the correct way to distinguish those extremes, then that's equally elusive, equally confusing. And if you do it knowingly, it can be manipulative. So all of these discussions about, God versus non-God and, going in the middle, I mean, that's a perspective. It's not the only perspective. And when you present that as the only reasonable perspective, and you have to sort of figure out where the neutral, quote unquote, position is, if you're not aware that that's just one way of looking at things, then you're just causing similar problems. So all of these frameworks of discussion can be and ought to be explored, but ought to be recognized as just another perspective. Okay, and that means the real question then is, what does neutral really mean? And that to me is where this phrase lightly held means. In other words, as Colin said, if my identity is not in how you view my framework, and I'm willing to consider other frameworks, that's the light holding of a perspective. And if we can all come to it this way, then we can have reasonable conversations. And then the next question to me is, how do you hold something lightly? I think
Charity.
that's an interesting question.
Yeah,
I think
we
that's
talked
charity.
a lot about
Open
that.
to new information. You have to be open to new reasoning, and it can't be so quick to get triggered. And you have to understand your own emotions when your identity is tied up in these frameworks. And that if you hear the slightest challenge to your framework, all of a sudden your emotions get fired.
Or trigger words.
Exactly.
Off to the races.
That's what a trigger is. So I think when you have triggers, ask yourself, am I holding this lightly enough to have an open conversation? Over. Barry's got his hand up.
Earlier, I mentioned the disparity between narratives or stories and theories, which are an analytical reasoning. And the thing about narrative stories is that almost always a narrative story is populated by characters. And characters are often just humans, people, or creatures which are in some sense human-like. That is, they speak, they listen, they communicate, they have beliefs, they have behaviors, and their actions are governed by their beliefs and their emotions. So why is it that our culture of stories is so dominant, so popular, and why are our stories almost always populated by characters?
An emotion.
For example.
Yeah. I think it's the only way to tell a story is to have a story. Is that circular?
Story that has characters. You have a story that just has abstractions, which then you basically got an analytical theory, which is
Barry, isn't that obvious?
Yeah, I think it is. But you could also tell a story about where there's no characters, and you would have to relate it back to characters through some meaning. So it always, like a cone or something, it always comes back to thinking about people.
The obviosity being anthropomorphism and being able to relate.
Exactly.
That's right.
Okay.
Oh,
Who creates stories and who attends to stories? People.
Yeah, we are people.
So you can frame it up again, to take my analogy a little further, that you might come across somebody, who I did, who thinks that, I asked them the question, do you think that people with religious beliefs somehow have more wisdom than people without it? And they said yes. Okay, so I'll give them that. They believe that also. Then I said, okay, now back to the situation of giving somebody help. Is it fair that the government holds you back from giving advice about your religion to people. Like they can do it in AA meetings, but I don't think they can do it in psychiatry meetings. I might be wrong about that. But if that's the case, they think they have more wisdom, but this broken, evil world of secularism, secular space, I should say, doesn't allow them to perform their, I don't want to say power over, their false found wisdom to assume that they know what's better for you and discounting your framework at the same time. So they're holding their beliefs strongly and they're not going to give them up. And even if the government might say, well, you want to teach this religious stuff to people to make their lives better, but you are in the position of a doctor, and therefore we've made some laws. Same thing with the courtroom, right? There's some laws that keep us from using that kind of wisdom in the courtroom because you need something called evidence. So where it's left to faith, one has to keep it to themselves personally. And I'm okay with that. That is the line that I keep talking about with secular. Everybody's allowed to speak their opinion secularly, but when it gets professional, they close it off again because it's back into the woo category. That's what I'm trying to say.
Colin, can I just interject? I just want to say that after getting the answer to the first question that you were given, that's when I would have just ended the conversation. Because even if you had framed the question the opposite, even if you had said, do you think people, even if they said, I think people who don't believe in God have more wisdom or whatever, I would drop the conversation with that person as well, because it just,
Right. Exactly. Well, these are filters. You are right about that. These are filters to help people find out if that person might be dangerous because their worldview is actually adversarial. And I got into this problem with Doug. He would say, I don't have any adversaries. Well, I would say somebody that thinks your worldview is wrong and wants to make decisions to block you from doing things in your worldview is an adversary and an enemy in some way.
So I just want to add one more thing. I'm going to say that what's dangerous is more what happens when people continue past that first question. That's the danger zone.
Yes. You might have the luxury to stop. You might have the luxury to stop, but not every situation has the luxury to stop, right?
Well, you certainly have the luxury to stop when you're talking to your neighbor about whether or not they got vaccinated. I mean, I have, and that's something I'll share. I don't have to share.
Hold on. The neighbor that's infectious, which touches your world. Now, I think you do have a valid opinion if your neighbor's doing dangerous things and spreading smallpox and stuff like that.
But what I'm saying is that there is a way to discuss those things and a way not to discuss it. And sometimes it's less dangerous to not discuss it and to approach it from a different way.
And I'm calling that a luxury of ignoring. And Glenn says the same things. Ignore it.
I don't think it's a luxury. I don't think it's a luxury because we haven't done a very good job in the state.
Well, there is something to keep a lid on the anger, like to keep a lid on the pot. They say, like, don't let it boil over. Like there's something to say. And that's back down to the emotional thing, what I mentioned earlier. And Sam is saying, like, when people's identities get wrapped up, they hold things too tightly. And then the conversation isn't easy to have anymore. So it's about identity in the end.
Okay. I think the last point I want to make is, Colin, like when you're having a conversation with that friend, I'm pretty sure that's who you're alluding to. No,
I'm not. This guy here is a whole new ball of evolution twisted wax.
Okay. then that's like a whole nother conversation, because sometimes amplifying something through conversation is a lot worse than if you
No, they're making claims. They're making claims, Stacey. You know me and people making claims.
Yeah. But then we're back to what Sam talked about. That you make claims, but are you capable of thinking the other perspective as well? And if you're not, then conversation's useless.
And he's definitely not. Stacey's right, it's useless, but it's an academic exercise for various reasons. And that might be more interesting to the group, why I would continue that conversation. But I'll just end there.
Okay, so I'm going to hold my hand up. Okay, I'll hold my hand up, which is that in actually having these conversations, one of the purposes for me is to learn how to have conversations with almost anyone. And that almost is important to me. It used to be everyone. I need to learn how to converse with everyone. Now I've changed it. So I need to learn how to have conversations with almost everyone. And that is because there reaches a point when someone, in my own estimation, I admit, becomes unreasonable, meaning you can't reason with them, meaning their truth comes from some other place than reason. Whether it's authority, whether it's their God, whether it's their culture, whether it's their own sense of, well, I just know because I have intuition, or whether because they channel truth from the universe, whatever, okay? Even if they do have that source of truth, I still lean in. I still try to understand that. But to the point that that becomes unexplainable by them, but they just say, well, that's just true. That's where, for me, it stops. Because when that statement is heard by me, reason stops. If you can't keep questioning, if you can't keep understanding, if you can't keep double clicking or, drilling through, then, curiosity is blocked. Openness is blocked.
So is that
now,
because they don't want to explore?
yes,
Is that
because they can't
they're not
explore.
willing?
You say when someone says that's just because that's the way it is, or because it's obviously true, or because I just know, or because I just channeled the truth of the universe, or because God told me, or because it's in this.
Surely, right? Surely it is. That's the
Right.
word that gets me.
Right. So
Or
that's why
all's another one.
I modify my purpose here as say I have to learn how to converse and consequently disagree well with almost everyone. And that's my.
And when they're emotional, good luck, right, Sam? That's the problem. Like that's another level.
Kind of goes without
I've
saying.
done that.
No, it has to go with saying, because otherwise there are places where every voice is welcome, every voice must be heard, all this sort of thing.
Yes.
But that's a different thing.
Well, no, that is true.
It's not a different thing.
Go ahead, Glenn.
No, it's not a different thing.
Well, I'll explain why. I'm saying, you can say that every voice can be heard, but if you're speaking with someone who's not willing to explore deeper, then you can't explore deeper. It's like that's a different thing. You can listen to them, you can learn more about them. You can have several friendly chat with them, right? But if they're attached to a certain belief that they're not willing to question or they're afraid of questioning, then obviously that path is blocked, right? Just goes without saying. So we're back to the whole question that we discussed many times before, that if you're going to go deeper into the exploration, then both parties will have to be able to re-examine a point of view and be able to have a flexible, unattached relationship with a point of view. And if one party doesn't have the ability to detach from a point of view, then that path is blocked. Just seems very obvious, right? But
There's different levels of information, but yes, generally speaking, there's equal unknowns. Equal unknowns, yes, you're right.
By the way, I'll tell a little story, because I have a few people at work, and one of them is probably a little bit influenced by what you could say alt-right culture, a little bit sympathetic towards Donald Trump, several others, very skeptical towards the wokeness and so on. And I've had a lot of conversations with him about different things. And then this new guy came at work, and he was, pretty into the sort of woke mentality. And, you could say left-leaning, maybe even strongly left-leaning, right? And we had a lot of really fun conversation on Friday, and it was about serious things, and it was also light. It's entirely possible, as long as you're not attached with your whole identity. And so in this case, it was clear that none of us were so attached with all our identity that it was possible to have an interesting conversation around all kinds of topics, and was a very friendly atmosphere. And, we shared points of view, and there was a sense of respect, and there was also a sense of sort of having a little bit of fun with it. So it's possible up to a point. But I think that also, if you want to go a lot deeper, if you really want to, come to a deeper understanding, you just have to be able to detach from a given perspective and consider other perspectives. And you have to have time to go deeper. And you have to have energy to go deeper. And you have to be able to, follow the thread, right? So there seems to be a lot of conditions that need to be there. A certain friendliness, a certain respectfulness, that helps a lot. Certain flexibility to not be attached with your identity to this point of view. You can argue something strongly, you think it's a strong argument, but you're willing to consider other points of view, right? So that's a requirement. And you have to have time to actually do the exploration. And that, I think that's often forgotten. Often we don't have time, or we don't have space, or we're interrupted by something else that happens. So the thread goes this far, then something else happens, and the exploration ends, and a different situation occurs. And maybe next time you come into the same topic, but you forget where you left off. So there's that as well. There seems to be a lot of requirements that need to be in place if this kind of deep exploration is going to happen and be fruitful. Yeah.
So I agree with what Glenn had to say about the time. And, if I could just share, on my drive down here, I went and I stopped over at a friend who I think I've mentioned before. We've been estranged because she said that she saw me as part of a socialist agenda. So she is very much against the vaccines and has a whole bunch of different fears. But she's also someone that has always taken care of her health and takes herbs and takes vitamins. And for whatever reason, we don't go there. However, the conversation that I did have with her was about masks. Now, just to give you a little bit of background, this is somebody that I know for many years. Spiritually speaking, we have this, we believe a lot of the same things. So what I left her with there was talking about her resistance, because she did not have a good reason for not wearing masks. It wasn't that she was giving me some crazy, reason other than pure resistance to being told what to do, and a lot of fear about that. So again, rather than talk about the science between vaccines or masks, I moved the conversation over to the emotional spiritual part, where I just, I backed off because, this is somebody that I love that I haven't spoken to for a year because of this. And this was, we both wanted to, heal the relationship. And I just left her with thinking about her resistance and what that means in her spiritual journey. So my point with that conversation is that there is a way to totally disagree with somebody and then move forward in a different direction. That's also an important direction. The second instance I had was once I got down here with a neighbor who I'm not quite as close to, but I always liked her. I always enjoyed her. And she is somebody also that won't get the vaccine. Now, this is somebody that's not as educated as the first person, who's very educated. However, she does wear a mask, and she is very, she is very careful to wear her mask. But I asked her what she does or how she reacts when she sees other people not wearing their masks when they should. Because what really came out in the conversation that I tried to have with her had to do more with the polarization. So I gave her that, yes, you are very healthy, you do work out, you are very careful. You've always taken herbs, you've always taken vitamins, and you're taking precautions to help other people. But there's still an us versus them mentality. And I said, when people see you not wearing your mask, they may not have been taking care of themselves as well. And they're looking at you like, yeah, they're so stupid, we shouldn't be wearing masks. And, the conversation ended, but she called me later and, she was worried that this might have put a strain on our friendship, which of course it didn't. And she said, I understand what you mean, and I will try to speak up more. To me, the fact that she may tell somebody to put on a mask, whereas in the past, she was just focused on her own anger of people pointing their fingers at her, that's more important to me. And with that, I'm complete.
Cullen, then me, then Alex. Cullen, you're on mute. Or you're not going to go take your turn. Okay, I'm just going to quickly add a note about this previous point about reasonableness being the block to really having good conversation. And that is that to the extent that emotions block reasonableness, strong emotions also block good conversation. I think for a while there's been, I think, a lack of appreciation for that. We understand that emotions mean that someone is triggered. And what happens is sometimes we lean too much into the course of the trigger, which is necessary, but it doesn't recognize the value of what was happening in the group prior to the trigger. And if there was value in what was going on in the group, then that also needs to be taken care of. So there's dual responsibility when someone gets triggered in a conversation. You have to understand the trigger, be human with it. Understand the trauma behind it, or the abuse or whatever it was. But also appreciate that, when two people get together, or 9 or 20 or 50 or 100 or more, that there's a value to having the momentum of the group still. And to detract that and just say, okay, everybody, now we have to listen to why Sam got triggered. That's not necessarily why other 99 people showed up. And I think that clear delineation of responsibilities is what I feel has not yet been explicitly understood and appreciated. So the fact that emotions do play that role in defocusing and blocking reasonableness, I just wanted to remake that point more strongly because it's actually been core phenomena, I think, here in GCC. Over. Alex, you're on.
I'm on. There's a saying about reasonable people never having achieved much or achieved much change in the world because it was always the unreasonable people who stood up to make change. So, but that's just an old saying. I don't know how much truth there is in it. So to be reasonable to assume that if we have a collective direction with our focus, it's to be more adaptive and more alert to the nuances that are coming our way with the faster technology and the rapid changes in the environmental conditions, economic uncertainty. But yes, I agree with what's been said so far, and that's made the conversation deeper. So thank you all.
Alex, since there's no other hands up, I have to say that's a different notion of unreasonableness than the one that I was trying to describe. What I was saying about unreasonableness is that reason is not being practiced, okay? Now, your quote, which I believe everyone here is familiar with, is the fact that one has to have your own strong belief in your own reasoning and purpose for being to effect change and decide your own course of action. and that you don't just, enter the, job pool and make minimum wage. So I think there's a different notion of what reasonable means there. And so I think that was a little bit, it's a valid point, but I believe it was off the point that I was trying to make. And how do I do that politely by saying, I think that was off topic? Over. Maybe I can't. Barry, you're on.
I'll just
But
point out,
it's necessary.
that some of the most reasonable people write compelling stories about unreasonable characters who populate their stories. Shakespeare, Stephen King, many authors who are extremely reasonable write very popular and very compelling stories populated by very unreasonable people.
Reasonable, so do we then mean someone who's willing to reason? Do we mean that then?
We're talking about, are we talking about wisdom versus information versus intelligence? I think somebody with a lack of intelligence, somebody with a low intelligence, whatever that means, could hear information for somebody that's wise or sagacious from, say, a Bible or something, I don't know. And they could learn that and they could pass on that wisdom, even though they themselves are not wise enough or intelligent enough, so to speak, to come up with that information on their own. They are capable enough to repeat it. So just because you get information from a person who seems unreliable doesn't mean the information they're giving is unreliable. And I think that's a big point in case to what Stacy's trying to say. You can't just dismiss a person because they're academics or whatever. You have to actually look at the claim they're making, right? And then they have to back it up. And you could ask the person, well, where'd you find that? And you say, well, the professor of whatever told me that, or I got that from my rabbi. And then you could go follow up with the rabbi, because obviously following up with the guy that gave you the information is not going to be very useful, because he himself is not a very, or she is not a very reliable source of information, because they don't have a lot of wisdom. They may just be very young. They might have some logic defects in their makeup of their brain. I don't know. So it's, wisdom can be passed on from people who cannot produce it themselves, so to speak.
Are you sure about that though? I mean, it seems that that's the case for some kinds of information, but
well,
don't you
an
think
afterlife.
there's certain?
I could say there's an afterlife.
Just
Go
for the
ahead.
record,
Go ahead,
Alex's hand is up.
Oh, Alex, go ahead, Alex.
The question about afterlife is neither here nor there, I think, in the topic of wisdom and focus. We've got people who are academically inclined who believe in deeply religious subjects, but we've also got people who have been through several years of meetings in these AA rooms, listening to lawyers and academics. I was surprised at the number of people that attended AA who had degrees and scientific experience. But the thing is, what the message came down to was the fact that you accept things, then you move on. You put things behind you that aren't working. If when you hear that other people have done it the same thing and it works for them, you begin to realize that maybe if I try it, it could work for me. And then if the trial works and you are having a happier life and experiencing less misery, you know it worked. You accepted the fact that you're not the center of the universe, and there might be some greater reason for life. There might be some bigger purpose to everything we know about. Scientifically,
right.
verifiable, scientifically verifiable facts. Over.
People can disagree about whether or not there is such a thing as an afterlife, but what I think is pretty obvious is there is such a thing as an aftermath. When you have an event in life that's very significant, there's the aftermath of that event, which is the history of your life after the event. So your life after is the aftermath. The aftermath is quite secular. The afterlife depends on how you interpret the meaning of the word. It's the life after the event, which is the aftermath.
Yeah, that makes sense. But to what you're saying, Alex, I think generally speaking, you can put things that aren't working behind you. Yes. And that's a personal thing. It might work for somebody else. So, that's your own personal journey. And, that's not really for me to criticize. But when you come to me, or I come to you better, I'll play the part of a Christian, for example. And I have a strong belief that there is an afterlife. Okay. And you decide to dismiss that. Was that a mistake on your part? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, or vice versa. So what I'm saying is Barry's right. We can't really agree, because it's literally a dumb person is one who doesn't speak aloud.
We don't.
Interesting. What do you mean by that, Barry?
Just
We
the
don't put people down.
original meaning of the word.
But like,
A dumb person.
to
Oh, a
take-
dumb person. You
well,
got me on
I
that.
wrote that in the
That's literal.
chat.
Yeah, literal.
Deaf and dumb. Dumb really meant.
That's
didn't
right.
speak.
But to that example,
I guess
Alex
stupid is what I'm
mentioned,
talking about.
But Alex mentioned this acceptance, right? So I was wondering, to take that example you mentioned, Colin, about whether, let's say, a dumb person or whatever can pass on something. So let's say a wise person speaks about acceptance, right? Speaks about it from experience, and you hear it, or somebody hears it.
Yes.
Can they practice acceptance? Or can they repeat a speech about acceptance, but not actually practice it? Because if they can only repeat a speech about acceptance, but they're not capable of practicing acceptance, then in my view, they haven't actually understood it. Because
No, they haven't accepted it.
Well, if there's a message that's being communicated about the importance of accepting oneself
Yes.
as you are,
An afterlife, and the
the
importance of an
world-
afterlife. Go for it. Go for it. Stick to the
well,
point.
let's say accepting that people believe in an afterlife could be an example.
Yeah.
But
Right.
so let's say you have someone who has that message, who transmits that message, somebody else hears that message. That doesn't mean they're capable of doing it. You see the difference? Maybe they can talk about it.
It's untestable in my world view that there's an afterlife with near-death experiences
I
aside.
know that, but I mean this example of practicing acceptance, because that's more testable, right? It is actually something that we can. It's something that has huge consequences for our quality of life, and I think it's a good example that it's possible for someone to speak about it, and it's possible for someone to still not practice it. It's possible for someone to hear it, and it's possible for them to repeat what they heard.
Yes.
But if they're not actually practicing it, then in a sense, those words are empty. You see what I mean? Because
No. The words are a placeholder for something that may be important, depending on how you do your analysis. So before we get to analysis, you have to realize that every word uttered, every claim made could deserve to be examined. Now, Sam is saying after it gets to a certain point, he has a filter. I have a filter. And when it comes to what we're talking about, I asked 3 questions to filter out whether it's worth going any further with this person or whether it's a threat, right? So I think we developed these tools to filter people into where you feel comfortable and safe and where you feel outside your comfortable zone and no longer safe. And you do have hopefully you have the luxury to disengage at that point, depending on what the stakes are.
Yeah, we already covered that. The point I'm making is if a message cannot be practiced, it hasn't really been understood. There's certain types of information where the whole point is the practice of it.
Yeah. Okay. So
that's
the knowledge of the soul.
Participatory.
I think Sam wants to go, but I think we could talk a little bit about the soul more concretely and get to the bottom of this. But I think Sam has something he wants to add, and Alex, so I won't dominate.
Yeah, I have three things actually. That's a very good point, Glenn, because some knowledge is in the form of skill. And if you don't practice it, you don't attain that skill. And if you don't attain that skill, you don't know the benefits of that skill. I would say yoga is in that category. I would say Tai Chi is in that category. Pretty much all martial arts, meditation is in that category. Perhaps religion, certain practices of religion are in that category, okay? So I hold open that that is still true. I also wanted to share, I just put a link. Point number 2 is I put a link that was given to me by a very, very good friend of mine who I haven't spoken to in 5 or 6 years, who it turns out is an anti-vaxxer. And so she sent me this name, Matthias Desmet, or Matthias Desmet. And she said, study this person. So I found some links. This is the first link that came up. I haven't yet studied this, so I'm going to, but if any of you are familiar with his work or are curious enough to find out, then we could have some interesting conversation here. And I'm open to this person, my original friend, so that I really do want to lean into what she is giving me. So I'm not saying, wow, geez, you're an anti-vaxxer, I'm not going to talk to you. I'm saying, from what basis do you have your course of action? And I'm leaning in. Okay, so that was point number 2. Point number 3, if I may, is to try and lighten up the conversation a little bit. And so I'm trying to figure out whether you guys are open to me reading a little post that I made just yesterday, okay? It is basically somebody named Charlie that on December 1 posted reasons why he refused to put winter tires on his car.
Charlie's not here. We're not allowed to talk about him.
Oh, he posted this publicly, so this is a public reading of his post.
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
No,
I talk to people
that rule
publicly.
does not apply here. And I've also said
I think I heard that post.
I'm poking you because you asked for
I'm just going to read
permission.
this article now because I feel like
No, now they're getting mad. I'm going to block you more.
Okay, good. All right. So I'm still trying to lighten this up, okay? So here's why Charlie doesn't want to put winter tires on his car. It's my car, my choice, my freedom. The effectiveness of winter tires is not proven except by studies carried out by biased manufacturers. My Facebook friend said he had an accident after putting winter tires on his car. Some people are already on the 3rd set of tires, which proves their ineffectiveness. We don't know what tires are made of. The tire giants scare us with winter just to enrich themselves.
This is hilarious.
If I have tires, the government can track me in the snow. Educate yourself. Open your eyes. Stop being sheeple. Trump told me, don't buy tires. And I added a few. Bill Gates has put microchips in every tire to track and control us. And other people are saying, tire technology is too new. The synthetic rubber is untested and was rushed to market only recently. We only trust natural tire minerals like they did for thousands of years when they made wooden tires clad with leather. Another one.
Yeah, the vaccines. Oh, go
We
ahead.
don't know what the long-term effects of winter tires are. Winter tires might impact my ability to conceive a child in the backseat of my car. Another one. Joe Rogan says I don't need winter tires. So it goes on and on and on and on. So
I heard that same thing. Somebody, this has gone viral in Norway too.
yes,
The same
yes,
thing.
in the last couple of days, yes.
Yeah,
So
let's
I'm just
hold
saying,
a
at some
72-hour
point-
summit about this.
So I can lean in to anybody who actually holds that position and have an interesting conversation with them, okay? But at some point, you can see what's going to happen. So I think that this point about reasonableness being a necessary condition for me to have conversation, to me is beginning to have weighty truthiness.
Have framework implications.
Yes, it does. Anyway, thanks for letting me read that. And thanks
Yeah, I
to
want to
everybody
jump
here
in on
except for
that.
Colin, okay?
I want to jump in.
Thanks, Sam. That was a good job. Good job.
A good one.
Yeah, I want to jump in on that because I just want to, take it more seriously. I'm not looking to lighten it up. And I want to say, first find out why, like the why is important. So I'm not putting snow tires on my car because I live in Florida and it doesn't snow. First, wait and hear the answer. I'm not putting snow tires on my car because I only have enough money to either buy that or to, pay for my medicine. I want to hear the reason first. And that's something that I don't think we do enough. Because, and that will
talking
guide the
reasonably.
direction.
You're being
I am,
reasonable, though,
but
Stacey.
here's the thing. I'm only willing to talk to reasonable people. And the reason I think that's important, and you might argue and say it's dangerous, is that there are plenty of reasonable people on what we call the other side, but they get swept up in the polarization. And that's my point. I've spoken to many, 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 many reasonable people that I don't agree with certain things. And I wish that there would have been less noise so that when these reasonable people have something that the other side considers reasonable, like we all agree, there are certain things that reasonable people will be able to agree upon better, even when they come from different sides. So, like, for example, I don't think you should be allowed to be in Congress, regardless of what side you're on, if you haven't demonstrated some effectiveness in being able to talk and discuss things with other reasonable people. And I'll be quiet now.
It's hard to tell where that line is or where
Alex
it's going
has
to
his
fall.
hand up, by the way.
So depending on the topic, somebody might be reasonable. I could talk about metaphysics with somebody and it's reasonable. They switch to politics, it gets completely unreasonable all of a sudden.
Just wanted to note, Alex has his hand up.
Yeah, I've got a point to make about the qualifications that people you listen to have, reasonable people, like the World Health Organization immunologist talking about vaccines. And he's on YouTube. He's been published on the Children's Defense website, Child Defense, so I believe it is. I'll try and find the link. And he's saying the unvaccinated are safe. It's the vaccinated people who should be quarantined because they're spreading the disease. The vaccinated people are spreading COVID. And he's saying that that's an issue because it's not a vaccine, really. It's just a weapon, a bioweapon created by some agenda to wipe out a lot of people. And that's
So
why
broken.
the vaccines haven't been sent to third world countries. The West has received the majority of vaccines. The third world countries have only had a tiny amount, apparently. But I'll try and find that link because it was interesting. The link was interesting, and the guy was a World Health Organization immunologist. Over.
By the way, one thing that is, it's true also, the person can be very reasonable in many ways, and then there can be this one topic where they've been pulled into this whole polarization thing. And what I experienced when I talked to a few of those at work was that it's quite possible to mention that polarization, and most people understand that, and they will even admit, I think often, that they themselves have been pulled into it. So that could also be a path that we can approach it, to speak about the polarization itself. And that's something I think most people would agree about, that there's a dynamic in social media of a sort of mimetic warfare, which hits people up against one another, and it creates these ongoing useless conversations that go nowhere, and they have these concepts that are actually, almost by design such that they're ambiguous and therefore lead to people speaking past one another and so on and so forth. I think that would be a very good thing if we become more aware of that dynamic itself, because that could help liberate us from a lot of those dynamics. Yeah, I'm done.
Rocky was paying very close attention to you, Len. Just to let you know.
I love it.
Anyway, Glenn, I love what you said because it sparked something else in me that I'm going to propose as a metric for Barry's what's the right word? Edification. Okay, so let's say thousands of years ago, the number of people who could hear what I think is a relatively small number. It's those people in my family or those people in my village, right? So let's say it's somewhere in the 1 to 20 or 1 to 50 range. There's a number of people who can hear. I'm not saying appreciate, just hear what I think and say, okay? Now, obviously through the ages with the internet, with publication of paper, with all things else, that has greatly magnified, right? So you no longer have to confine yourself to just those 1 or 2 dozen people in your tribe that can hear what you think. So right now, it's almost free to spew almost anything. But back then, when let's say 100 or 200 years ago, when I wanted to say something to, let's say, my betrothed who was on a train off to a city, a little far, far away, I would painstakingly craft a letter. I would probably put hundreds of words in that letter. I would compose those sentences well. I would organize it into paragraphs. I would have points I wanted to make. I would have emotions I want to convey. I would close it with, a sincere closing. I would open it with a very inviting and loving, introduction, et cetera, et cetera. There was a craft to putting together a message that you would send because it costs you, I don't know, 10 cents or 20 cents, whatever it was, in those Wells Fargo days, to send a letter to someone from in a city far away. Well, now, because it's so cheap, it costs virtually nothing to just send the very first thing off the top of your head, completely unfiltered, completely unevaluated, completely probably even subconscious. And it could be 1 word, 2 words, 3 letters, just a copy of a meme, et cetera, et cetera. And it's practically free. And yet it can still reach thousands, and I would argue millions for some people on Twitter and some people on Facebook. And that cost is just phenomenally cheap. So the value to communication cost, okay, the value of the message compared to the communication cost of the message itself has drastically changed in these few thousand years. So the value, let's say, just to echo some irrational thought or meme, when value is low, and when the cost to distribute that communication is also low, witness now just the phenomenally universal spread of stupid things. Now, smart things, when the value is high and the effort required to extract that truth from a smart message, from, let's say, a Scientific American article or a ADA article or anything else, when it takes effort to extract the value and the truth from that message, then not only is the communication cost low, okay, but now there's a different communication cost on the receiving side. The cost of reading, the cost of understanding, the cost of internalizing, the cost of mapping it into your own knowledge base or your own mental model or theory of mind or whatever you want to call it, okay? So when the costs are high to getting truth and the costs are low to getting idiocy, what do you think happens? I think that's an interesting metric to look at, and that's an interesting trend line to draw. And that's, I think, a good way for me to understand what's been happening recently. And there's other implications there, but this is where I'll stop. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a classical issue. Yeah, many speak about that.
Flood of misinformation.
Information overload and all that. But by the way, since nobody else has their hand up, that reminds me of something that I actually wanted to share with you guys. And because I spoke also with these colleagues of mine a little bit about something that's connected to this. and it's this issue of surveillance. And, you know, there's a lot of focus on it these days, that there's more and more surveillance, there's more and more data tracking. So the way I look at it is there's more and more data that's being passed from person to person, and more is being stored in different computers. And because of the information overload, it's not like there's any big brother watching you, because the big brother doesn't have enough attention, plain and simple. It doesn't have a snowball's chance in hell of following it all. However, it is a situation today, one could argue, where very much of what we're doing is being stored somewhere. And that in a way, we're in a situation where everyone is being surveilled by everyone else, at least in principle. So there's a strong trend towards centralized surveillance, and there's also a very strong trend towards decentralized surveillance. So you have governments, you have companies, and you have hackers, and all of this basically means that it's a situation. In a sense, it's a transparent society, at least in principle. So what I was discussing is that usually the narrative is very dystopian, because that's one of the characteristics of modern Western cultures, as I see it, is this dystopian stories are circulating endlessly. So everything is always being portrayed in terms of how scary it is and so on, right? But I was wondering if maybe that situation is a long-term good for humanity in the following sense. It seems to be a situation now where if you engage in antisocial behavior, it's a very big chance that it's going to be discovered sooner or later. Maybe not if it's just small stuff, but if it's serious stuff. Like there was a very bad murder in England by a policeman, and he had calculated it and done a lot of work to prepare it, found an innocent victim, he kidnapped her and killed her. And that was discovered because of video cameras, because of all kinds of technological evidence. So on the one hand, there's this situation where you're sort of de-incentivized towards antisocial behavior. Kind of everyone is all over, at least sort of really antisocial. Now, for example, spreading disinformation is maybe antisocial behavior according to some. I would argue it is, but it's not in the category we're speaking here. I'm talking about really, really bad stuff that is unanimously considered to be bad. We seem to be in a situation where there's strong incentives not to do that. Even if you can cover your tracks and so-called get away with it, there's an increasing risk it's going to be discovered sooner or later. So that's one side of the issue. But then what I found was more interesting was that this also, if it is a situation, and it seems to be, it's a sort of transparent global scenario, it could be a situation where there's also incentives for the opposite, in the sense of imagine super cultures, super societies, where people actually manage to behave in ways which are truly beautiful and truly beneficial and do not create harm, any noticeable harm, and maybe even can create breakthrough insights. So the other side of it is that those kind of societies might thrive in that kind of information ecology because they can just create, and they don't have to worry about data security at all. So they don't have to spend any energy on data security. And it was very shocking to me when I heard that in blockchain technology, they're spending about 99% of their research on data security and 1% on research and development. But if you have these kind of super communities or super societies which could emerge, they might be able to spend 99% on research and development and hardly worry about data security at all. So that's another very interesting thing. Nobody speaks about this, but I think there's some long-term incentives which go against terrible anti-social behavior while rewarding amazing pro-social behaviors. But then I want to add the last thing. If those amazing pro-social behaviors are actually going to happen, if those super communities are going to emerge, then they will probably need to have a science of being, a science of self-development, and have an ability to develop their minds and their behaviors. And it will be a need for discipline and will. And that's advanced stuff. So I don't think that those super communities will just emerge by themselves. What I'm saying is, if they could emerge, then they should be able to thrive in a world where all data is being stored everywhere. I wonder if you could follow that line of reasoning. I'll have to think more about it, but I think there's an interesting idea there. So just wanted to share it. Yeah, I'm finished.
In my lifetime, and especially in the late 20th and early 21st century, I've observed the development of artificial intelligence and intelligent robots. And one of the things that they're doing with these sociable robots is evolving them to relate to people as companions. And I was attending a conversation with some people from MIT yesterday who were talking about sociable robots. And one observation was that the sociable robots performed better in general when they mimicked the demeanor of the person they were relating to. And as I was thinking about that, I said, yeah, if the person using the social robot has a very sociable demeanor, pro-social demeanor, then it does make sense for the robot to emulate that. But what if the person is not a pro-social, but an antisocial person who's very rude and sarcastic and yells at the robot? Then would it make sense for the robot to emulate that, to mimic that? And it occurs to me the answer is clearly not. So that raises the interesting question. At what point would a sociable robot learn to adopt a demeanor that is not the mirror image of the human, not the complementary image, but some optimally chosen opposite, or not an opposite, some optimally chosen demeanor that is most therapeutic? And I think that's an unanswered question. But it also occurs to me that the sociable robot culture might figure out the answer to that before psychologists do and the general public does.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So that's really interesting to me, because one of the things that I always think about is, emotions being rated on a scale. because I think that, if somebody comes to me and their emotions are at a 7, for example, I have to come in at a 3 in order to give them a chance to back up. So yeah, I'm with you on that, Barry.
I think it's a really interesting unsolved problem, but solvable problem. And the
Definitely
social robot
solvable.
culture may help us lead the way to discovering the optimal response behavior, the most therapeutic response behavior.
Should be solvable. Yeah. That would be amazing. They could do
I'm gonna
that.
check out with my last response to Barry, okay?
Okay.
I think it's eminently solvable. I think that the experimentation that is going to get conducted before we get there is going to generate a lot of, unfortunately, undesirable aftermath before we actually get to any of those optimal behaviors. And that's assuming we even get there.
Yeah.
Because part of the problem is we have to know what to optimize for all of these algorithms, et cetera, TensorFlow, all these different learning structures to actually try to converge. And we don't know what really to optimize for.
Yeah.
And experimenting with that is going to create consequences, side effects that are not anticipated. And that's the problem with technology right there. And this is the problem people have always assumed was going to bite us when AI got smart enough, quote unquote.
Yeah.
That science fiction called it 50, 60, 70 years ago. This moment in time would actually, come to face us. Anyway, I'm going to check out by saying that this was extremely valuable to me, this particular conversation, because it allowed me through that last metric that I described to understand the phenomena that has wide-ranging temporal longevity and effect. So I'm going to elaborate on that. And now, since I check out, I see Joshua there. So you guys are on your own now.
Good to see you there.
Don't leave us.
How are you doing, Joshua? You haven't heard your
I'm doing
voice yet.
good. I'm just sort of waking up, about to have coffee, but I was going to tell you, we were in a clubhouse room last night, and Eric Weinstein tried to come in and pull his Eric Weinstein stuff. So I told him, "This isn't a room for you, buddy. Go back to the
You
audience."
never. Josh told Weinstein to check his privilege.
Oh, a little bit, because, well, to be straight up, his story was we were talking about how to Feynman-splain something. So instead of mansplain, practice
love
Feynman-splaining. Yeah,
I
so we
love
were all
Feynman.
practicing the Feynman method of, if we know a subject really well, let's explain it to each other. And you can ask the question and explain your own question. So we were practicing that. And then he came in and started saying, well, actually, Feynman is not, wasn't always able to explain things. I was like, you know what? That's not what we're doing here. We're practicing explaining things, not here to talk about Feynman's reputation or your reputation or the 300 people that come with you when you come into a room. So it was really interesting, actually. I thought you might, because I revere him. I think he's one of the greatest thinkers of our time. I really like Eric Feynman, but I didn't like the way he came at the conversation with like that privilege, that kind of like, I'm here because I'm so much smarter than everyone.
The wrong framework for a positive conversation for you, or even a fair conversation, you could say.
Yeah, and I didn't even start the room. It wasn't my room. I was just co-moderating for my friends. And we were having a great time actually talking about symmetry before he came in.
Yeah.
And it's sort of, I feel bad for him because he's got a 800 or I don't know how many followers. Whenever he goes on stage, all these people just flood into the room. So it's really strange.
Flies. Gadflies.
Yeah.
Is he active? Is he very active on Clubhouse these days?
He was months ago. I hadn't seen him for months, and I found it strange that he found our room of all, like there was only 6 or 7 people in the room. So I found it strange that I don't know how he got notified. Maybe he's got an alert that if someone's talking about symmetry, he comes in. Like I found it strange. Anyway.
Yeah, he's got news alerts on all the channels.
Yeah, well, I got news alerts on Glenn because I was listening to you talk, Glenn, and I put it in Cusella's ear while I was making the coffee, so I didn't get to hear everything you said. But good to see you. I haven't seen you in a while, Glenn.
Yeah, I haven't been able to join you for a while, but yeah, we were talking about some interesting things. Where I think I maybe overcomplicated it, but I was sort of exploring this idea that if the world is sort of informationally transparent in the sense that everything we do, that a lot of data is being stored about practically all people, that might create a situation where kind of everyone is being surveilled by everyone else, at least in principle, even though information overload will make sure that people will actually in practice have a degree of privacy, especially people who are sort of like common people who don't do anything spectacular one way or the other, will probably have a high degree of privacy, I think, even in such a world. But that maybe that kind of a world could create long-term incentives against strongly antisocial behaviors, while powerful pro-social behaviors might thrive in that kind of environment, because you could imagine that there could grow these super cultures where people can just do absolutely awesome things and they don't have to worry about data security at all, because they can just say, be completely transparent. And I thought that was a very interesting idea. But I also then thought about it some more, and it seems clear to me that those kind of super cultures will probably not just happen by themselves. It might be quite an advanced science of sorts, or an advanced knowledge or wisdom that's needed to create those kinds of super cultures and make them thrive. But I think it's very interesting that, because I don't see this ending anytime soon, right? That enormous amounts of data are being stored about people all over the world. Information technology is becoming more and more important.
There's the idea of tracking what we do know. So we have unknowns and we have knowns, right? And there's a certain amount of unknowns that could be determinable. Now, I'm going to cheat and say I know God, and I asked God, and he gave me a list of all the things that we could discover, things we thought we couldn't, we can. He's also given me a list of the things that we could never discover, right? So I know what they are, but you don't have to believe me. So I'm going to make a model of that, hand it to you. And I'm not going to tell you which are which. I'm just going to say some things belong in one category, the knowable. Some things belong in the unknowable category. Okay. Now, when I come up across somebody, I'm going to forget about the God thing now. Let's back up. I'm an atheist again. So, but I still have this model that somebody gave me that's been validated by a God. Okay. So now somebody tells me about a claim. We're not talking about the stuff we can find out, like you were talking about, Glenn. They're talking about the stuff that we could never find out. Okay, but they say, oh, well, Pascal's wager, there's all these kinds of emotional pleas. And there's also some amount of historical evidence that would point in that direction, perhaps, some things. But there's always somewheres a claim that's made that you have to make a leap of what I call supernatural faith. Although I get a lot of pushback on the word supernatural too. Define that. What do you mean by supernatural? It's like, okay, you get into a big mess when you try to use words in sentences. But let's just take for granted that
we've had that for a long time. I don't mean to interrupt you. I was just, when you say I use this word and I get pushback on this word, can you substitute that word for another word you can?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's what I had to do.
Yeah.
I had to keep readjusting my words. You're right. So I come up with a single claim that I think is untestable. That is that a soul exists in a way that a deity has created it and put it into a human being. And then at some point that soul can be transferred to an afterlife. Okay. So that's the claim. I don't think there's any way that can be proven. I'm assuming God would tell me that if I asked him, and he answered me, yeah, you never know. You got to wait till you die to find that out, right?
I think a soul named
So the
Alex
point
Reed
is, Glenn,
exists. He's had his hand up.
that's a,
I was gonna say,
yeah, so
there's
yeah,
a soul that
yeah.
exists. I'm just letting you know.
Yeah, okay. That's your opinion. So the thing is, if people do come and tell me there's this a deistic soul, and I'm coming from an atheist framework, is it possible for us to have an open enough mind for both sides to see the other's point of view? And then how much credence do we give that information, knowing that it can't be tested as such? That's my thing. And
Yeah.
you can get different flavors of that, right? But that's the conundrum. How do you find out if it's a reliable source of information? Do you let emotion and prayer take place of unknown and wishful and hopeful thinking? I should say hopeful thinking, not wishful. Wishful means you expect an answer, maybe not. Hope definitely is just something you hope for. Prayer is something that you could have a feedback loop, which requires faith, right? And I'm calling it supernatural faith, but I have to find a better word, like Josh pointed out as well. So it's a lot of, so it's an understanding you have to have of the words so that we can start to use some kind of words.
The word prayer has a different meaning in my world, because I use prayer not as a tool to strengthen my faith in a deity. I use prayer because the scientific experimentation has proved that it works. When you do prayer, you're making auto-suggestion, you're affecting your own mind, right? You're affecting your own heart as well. You're affecting your feelings, your emotions, and your beliefs.
Sure.
But the fact that there's a deity controlling the prayer or listening to the prayer is by and by. That's regardless of whether you believe.
That's the point.
So atheists can use prayer. If atheists want to use prayer, they can try it, and it'll work for some. It won't work for others. But the point I wanted to get to about Barry's mention of be awesome. I was trying to be awesome with my artwork, but emotionally and intellectually, the 100-pound gorilla in the room was my cognitive bias. So that was
Don't forget to be awesome. Yeah.
That was blocking my attempts to be awesome and create great art.
Yeah.
So how do I deal with this gorilla in the room that's a 100-pound gorilla, and it's a cognitive bias. It's a reasonable disability. Reasoning disability. Anyway,
whose cognitive bias are you? Yeah,
we're using
cognitive bias?
System, so back to Josh. Over.
Yeah, well, you just replied to me, so I'll just say, as far as prayer, I would say you could substitute the word meditation, and we'd be right back on agreement, right?
Or even affirmation is another word that could be used.
Affirmation, I don't know what that word means to use it, like in this context. Prayer or meditate, how does affirmation?
Prayer,
affirmation is after the fact, right?
Auto-suggestion.
Yeah, or auto-suggestion. It's like you say something to yourself.
Affirm. The word affirm.
Yeah, to affirm.
Yeah, to affirm. Yeah, so when you are affirming something, I think that's the act after the observation. That is the observation you get from doing the act. So you prayer and then you observe what happens and affirm if the prayer worked.
It's like take an example, the Lord's Prayer. Give me strength to forgive. Yeah, let's say that example. That's a kind of an affirmation, right? I want to.
I see what you mean.
Have the strength to forgive. So if I pray to something beyond myself, that
sounds like a claim. That sounds like a claim. Actually,
but the thing,
it's a mantra. You're telling yourself.
It's kind of you're kind of asking for something.
Yeah.
And you might get it.
Right.
It's an assertion that something exists or is true, something that is affirmed. Yeah. So it's not, you don't pray affirmation. You pray because you have some kind of affirmation, which I would call faith.
Yeah,
it's a statement. A statement. Hold on, right here. A statement. A statement.
You're gonna loop.
I know, but we got to start somewhere.
Wait
a statement or proposition that is declared to be true is affirmation. That's what I thought.
No. I'm not talking.
What do you mean by affirmation? You got a different definition. That's all. That's fine.
Yeah. I
What's
know
your
that
definition?
word as well as several. But what I mean is, if you pray for patience, let's say I pray to God or to whoever for patience. Give me patience. that is a sort of affirmation in the sense that I have a wish to be more patient.
Sounds
So
like
I
a request.
pray, a request, right? But what I'm praying for is something inside myself, and that those kind of prayers can work.
After you feel more patience, then you can say, it's been affirmed, I guess. I don't know.
But by the way, what I didn't understand in what you said, Colin, was like somebody talks about the soul and the afterlife or whatever.
Yeah.
But what is there a problem with it?
No.
What's the
There's no
problem?
problem. There's no problem on face value. So this is the setup. Nobody's going around trying to pick on people. You just sit down in a coffee shop, and then Glenn, you tell me, hey, have you heard about this thing called a soul? Right.
Yeah.
And then the conversation starts from there. As an atheist, you would have to appreciate my worldview in order to see how I react and filter that information into the I don't know category. And me, as an atheist, I would have to be able to look at you as a believer and say, this guy's got a lot of faith. This is hooked up to his identity. He uses this for a coping mechanism of some sort. I'm not going to cross that. Just like I'm not going to cross somebody who's going to AA meetings. It's their personal thing. But when you come to the school system and say, I affirm that there's an afterlife for all the kids in this school to learn about, and it's only the demon science teachers keeping the information away, then you've gone too far, and I think you're a risk to my worldview. That's
right. So the line is when you're trying to change something. Right?
Public influence. Yeah, public influence with undue source of reliable information. And that's the question. Is it a reliable source of information?
You want to change other people's
I think that's
behaviors.
a stalemate. I think that, I think when you're looking at it, it comes to a stalemate because nobody can really prove it. So it gets into a game of level of confidence or faith. And then you have to look at the stakes that are involved. And if you think about it, in the history of mankind, it has been assumed pretty much that there were deities. And we're just now, I think, in the beginning of reason being taken reasonably. And unfortunately, we've opened up a whole nother set of can of worms or many cans of worms. I'm worried what's going to happen when we replace religion with some kind of funky transhumanism where, you can do some really crazy things to the human genome, right? Yeah.
That's so interesting because I was wanting to mention it earlier. I know you have your hand up, Josh, but just I talked to a colleague. He's been speaking about artificial intelligence, and he has this big idea about this self-transforming, super conscious being, singularity thing. You've all heard the story. And it's occurred to me that that's a kind of modern religious myth. I think it is, actually, where we, instead of, God as the old guy in the sky with the beard who's micromanaging, you sort of put God into the future as this emergent thing that grows out of the interplay between many minds, and it becomes this new super intelligence that can evolve itself to ever new levels. And even Elon Musk speaks about that stuff. I don't know if he considers himself religious in the classical sense, but when he's speaking about AI, it sounds pretty religious to me. It's like a different kind of myth, a myth about a super being. Yeah, I just want to mention that. I think it's interesting.
Yeah, I saw Barry writing in. I just was going to say, I raised my hand because Barry had written in the chat a while back, do AIs have personalities? And then I see your hand up, Alex. I'm going to take my hand out.
The Turing machine, is that what it does to find that out, right?
Thing I wanted to mention was the ultimate intelligence is the supreme intelligence of the universe, and the computer man has created is the virtual intelligence. It's the mechanical machine intelligence, like taking the knowledge of all the leading academics in the world and all the encyclopedias and putting them all into one chip in one brain, and then start asking it questions. Of course, it's going to dish out a lot of intelligent answers, but ask it how it feels.
Maybe.
How does it feel about that? It doesn't have any response. It doesn't have any feelings because it's a machine. It's not a super intelligence is a combination of people getting together and agreeing on something. Over.
There's the rub, the agreement. Go ahead, Josh, you had something.
Oh no, I've just been playing with GPT-3 and then we ask it how it feels and it comes up with this long answer of how it feels, but it's synthesizing
ridiculous.
it from information of how other people felt, and then it's just putting it into an algorithm that's playing with words. So it says, well, I feel really sad that you said that. And it's just saying that. But go ahead, Barry.
Gave the most powerful computer a really hard problem that no human has yet solved, but it's in principle solvable. And after the machine has been working on it for a while, you say, how do you feel? And the machine might say, I'm still vexed and perplexed. Make perfectly good sense, meaning it hasn't made enough progress to feel confident that's en route to the solution.
Yeah.
And to say it's vexed and perplexed, I mean, I say that quite frequently because I am.
More information. Yeah, more information, the more complex.
It's an affective state when you have uncertainty and you don't have a solid model that's working yet. And it doesn't matter if you've got a brain made of neurons or a computer, made of silicon chips or an alien life or whatever. If you're working on an unsolved problem and you haven't got the problem solved yet, you're in an affective state of uncertainty. You're still vexed and perplexed.
Yeah, I'd like to add to Alex's analogy, as you just did as well, vexed and perplexed. Wouldn't a subject matter that there is no accepted value cause complexion, and it almost make the computer smoke trying to go back between all the different experts and different opinions because it's not agreed upon, right? So I agree with you. There's a lot of things computers can do, like image processing better than human eyes. So they can find things in diagnosis and images and things like that, which is very powerful. Computers can do pattern matching. They can, to find DNA sequences and foldings of proteins. And, we've talked about all that stuff here at least twice, maybe 5 times. But I would say if you asked the computer, is there a soul? It would come back and say, I'm vexed and perplexed about that. Probably not.
I have an operating system. Have you noticed it? You have a social robot. It has a personality. You would characterize your social robot as friendly or reticent or whatever you want to. You would characterize it like you'd characterize a storybook character, because it is a storybook character. You could write a story which involves a robot as one of the characters. Like, what is it? Number 5. What was the name of that?
Yeah,
one?
you still have that social robot, Barry?
No,
Wow.
I only had Jibo for 4 weeks as part of an MIT ongoing study. So my stint was 8 weeks total. First 2 weeks before it, 4 weeks with it, and then 2 weeks follow up after it. And then it went back to MIT. So somebody else has it now. But that's part of a study to develop sociable robots who are in some sense not just companions but therapeutic, that they improve the well-being, they improve the emotional well-being of the person who's engaged with it.
That would be a really amazing thing to accomplish.
That's
Alex
their
is
long-term
next.
goal.
But you can probably do that even without a physical robot if you just have an app, right?
Oh yeah, you don't need a physical robot unless you want to dance with it, I guess. But
Yeah.
a lot of people will react to a physical artifact as opposed to a completely abstract, just the voice. And actually, the Jibo robot is less functional than Siri or Alexa. They've actually got more code in Siri and Alexa or Google Voice than they have in Jibo. But people like the physical, the machine, the physical thing that looks like a creature.
Oh.
Familiarity But
I think it's also a novelty. It would wear off. You'd want to get rid of the thing after a while, just turn it into a speaker.
I think
Yeah,
Colin,
maybe.
Well, they're expensive. They're a
I
lot
think-
more expensive than just a voice.
Go ahead, Alex.
Yes.
yeah, I think Colin was talking about the volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world, because the world we live in is non-linear, yet we think in linear ways. And we have this
Truth
real
to that.
world, the real world adaptive. The real world is adaptive and organic, yet we think in mechanicalistic ways. We have this anthropomorphic lens
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
over.
And bias. I think
Yeah.
bias was the big thing. How do we acknowledge it and see it and own it? And I guess it comes back to Sam's statement about strong beliefs held loosely. If you got strong beliefs held strongly, then your identity is being attacked, and you're probably going to be more emotional and less reasonable. But it is hard. If something is worth fighting for, then I would expect you to be angry. Danger. Right?
And I guess if you don't have any strong beliefs at all, you just become sort of a nobody and incapable of doing anything.
No, that
Well-
helps you. It helps free you from the biases and the cognitive bias.
No, but the thing, if you hold it lightly, that can free you, right?
No,
kind of
no, it's a
need to
strong
have
belief.
some-
It's a strong belief. You hold the belief strongly, well, in your
Strong
mind.
belief.
But in your
Held
conversation with somebody else, it's a strong belief in your mind, but it's held
Yeah.
loosely when it comes to being open-minded
Exactly.
to listen to somebody else's framework.
Yeah,
I guess.
so you don't have to log out because you heard something disturbing.
Yeah.
Or
don't
when
have-
you're
Well, the
just,
deal is, Go ahead,
Joshua
Josh.
has something.
well, I had this happen actually in the conversation last night. This gentleman was explaining, we were talking about the precession of the earth, and then we got into where the earth is at different parts during different times of the year and how it works. And we started talking about the 0 day where the sun is directly 90 degrees overhead and casts no shadow. And this big argument happened, well, where on earth could that happen? And there was a strong belief by the person that was explaining it, and they were arguing with another person who's super well skilled and versed on planets and rotation, and they actually work with NASA. And the two of them were just fighting, going at it. And then finally they listened to each other enough to go, oh, okay, I see where you're coming from, and I never thought of it that way. But then also you are not saying this. So they both had to loosen up their beliefs, and they both learned something. It was pretty amazing. Because they thought they knew,
Yeah.
but when they rethought it again with new information, went, oh, actually, oh, wait, you're right. But that would be on a different part of the earth. And then the other person's like, yeah, it would be on a different part, but it wouldn't be on that other part. And then the other person said, yeah, it could be on that part too. And they're like, no, it can't be. And they're like, well, no, it could be. And then they explained it, and they went, oh shit, you're right. It could be on that part of the earth too. If it was
Yeah.
precession was wobbling, because they never thought of the different axes and planes of movement over a 26,000 year period. And so it's really interesting to take out the framework. A lot of it has to do with time. And that's why that Greek word realite is a thing in time. So when you're trying to get to what's reality, you have to really define the time scale and the exact moment in time where that thing is true. Because if you fast forward 1,000 years, it's not true. The earth will be in a different spot. And we've only been here for a few, like I've only been here for 48 years. So I don't know what happened before I was here. I don't know what happens after I leave this planet, but I only know what I see when I'm here. So anyway, it takes a lot of humbleness to, for that lady to say, I learned something I didn't know. And because she knows everything. I was like amazed. And yeah, there's so much to know in time, because time is sort of non-linear. If you look at it on an infinite scale, what happened 17 billion years ago? We haven't really had those conversations.
Exactly. I gotta go now, but you guys, I'll just say a quote. I really like this. The larger the island of knowledge, the longer the shoreline of wonder. That's what
Beautiful.
we're talking about.
Say that again, Glenn.
The larger the island of knowledge, the longer the shoreline of wonder.
Hmm.
And when you
It's
walk the
mathematical.
shoreline, yeah. So if you're walking a shoreline and you see your own footprints, you know you've been around, circumnavigated. So I'll check out with this. I'll check out with this saying that when I tell people that I'm aware of how little I know, I'm asserting that I know something.
Yes,
Yeah,
you're asserting you're becoming wiser. Yes.
that's the Socratic irony right there.
Yeah, it is irony. My
But-
irony checkout is that I guess it's about biases, which is built-in irony. It's like having multiple reflective mirrors of irony, and you have to be careful. And when you have the luxury to back away from someone you think that cannot engage in a reasonable conversation, which was Sam's point, then he's saying he's considering that now, or that's part of his framework. It's part of my framework. It's part of everybody's framework. It's called filtering out the people who scare you.
Yeah.
And you know, if you can have more courage and wisdom, then you can possibly talk with more people. But I guess in the end, it comes down to what I was mentioning with Stacy. If you can afford the time to investigate, it takes effort. And sometimes you can have the luxury to just disengage. And that can, you know, Barry and I, we butted heads. We probably would have been better off disengaging, but at the same time, I think we saw through that somehow too. There's more value somewhere else. So I think it's not about Barry and I anymore. I don't feel any animosity towards Barry. But at the time, he was telling me I had no right to talk about theory of mind and all this stuff. And of course he was right. It's just misunderstandings of how difficult it is and how easy he might have thought I thought it was. Yeah. Anyway, I'll check out. It's irony, bias, and luxury to disengage if you can.
Check it out,
Yeah,
Kayla.
I just, wait,
Go ahead,
I'm sorry,
Stacy.
I couldn't
I
find the
didn't-
mute button. I just
I
wanted
didn't-
to say the one word that Colin left out is discernment, because I don't see it so much as, you know, courage or any of those things. But if you can't make it better, then leave it alone and let somebody
Yeah.
else step in.
Well, if it's hard, sometimes you need courage and patience and a lot of things. But yeah, you're right. There's a lot of words we can add, I'm sure.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Well, that's another thing, true, right? Like, why are them kids today driving them cars? Them horses were good enough. Horses were good enough.
If it ain't broke, maintain it, because it will break if it's not maintained.
Or if you can't maintain it, give it to somebody who can.
I'll take it.
Hey, goodbye, everybody.
You need
Bye.
a bigger,
Bye.
right. You'll need a bigger place, Barry.
You know, Josh, I think that of all the things that they teach you in school, one thing that they almost never teach, which really would be useful, is to teach the concepts behind celestial navigation. And we don't use celestial navigation because we have GPS, but for 1,000 years, that's all they had was celestial navigation. It was developed about 1,000 years ago. And the mathematics of it is really remarkably interesting and fascinating and challenging. And it depends on the notion that no matter where you are on the surface of the earth, at any instant, if you look straight up, there is a point on the celestial sphere that's directly overhead. And celestial navigation depends on knowing, if you look at an object in the sky, a star, a planet, the sun, the moon, whatever, at a particular instant of time when you spot it a certain point above the horizon, there's exactly one place on the surface of the earth where that object is directly overhead at that instant. And the Nautical Almanac is an annual book that tells you for every star that you can possibly sight on. It tells you where on the surface of the Earth that object is directly overhead at the instant that you sight it. And then you're on a circle such that anywhere on that circle, you'd see that object at that elevation. And then you say, okay, I'm on that circle. I'm on a little piece of that circle. On my map, that little circle is just a line. And if I pick an object up there, that puts me on a line, which is part of the circle where that object is at that altitude. And then if I pick a different object looking over there, I get myself on a different circle. And that circle has a little line, and where they cross is roughly where I am. And that concept, the fact that you can actually do the math, provided you know what time it is and what day it is, what year it is, that's really remarkable. And there's a fabulous stories about how we all figured that out 1,000 years ago.
Yeah. And they were talking about a story of how the Jesuits were figuring out 1 second of time with a pendulum.
Right.
And in order to do that, they had to count with monks with rosary beads, each swing back and forth during that one day where it's directly overhead.
Yeah.
Yet time and space are two things that are really important to understand where you are in time and space on this planet. It's yeah, I agree. Go ahead,
I
Alex.
think if Einstein asserted that time and space were one thing.
I don't know.
Well, when you're looking, it's a perspective view. When you're looking at time, you're looking through space, and the light's coming from an infinite source. So the light's traveling at a speed that we can't achieve. We can't reach that speed because when we approach the speed of light, time seems to slow down. When you hit the speed of light, time's standing still. You've reached a point of infinite complexity, or what do you call it? The vanishing point.
Yeah.
Singularity.
You know, when we use GPS, we're relying on satellites that are in orbit, and those satellites are far enough away and moving fast enough that you have to take into account Einstein's mathematics. You could get away with Newton's simplified mathematics for most situations, but when you do GPS, the mathematics has to take into account relativity, because the clocks aboard those satellites are not ticking at the same rate.
There's a reason you can't have absolute zero in science, and there's a reason you can't travel at the speed of light. And I think both of those reasons are similar, and they relate to the fact that if you're approaching an object and you stop at the 50% mark, you reach the halfway point, you stop and measure the remaining distance, and then divide that by 2, travel that far, and do it again. You can keep repeating that ad infinitum and never reach the point you intended to reach. Over.
Yeah, and to talk like that, Alex, you're probably one of the wisest men back in the days of Plato. You know what I mean? Like to speak like that, they'd come and gather around you talking like that. But I have an idea on that as well. I think you're close. I don't know. Who knows? But from what I've been listening to from Lee Smolin, I think that's how you pronounce his name. He's suggesting that time may be, and Barry follows this stuff with, I think also there's a, what's his name? Egan? Can you say his name again? The not Penrose guy. Ethan
Siegel?
Yeah, the YouTube guy.
Ethan. Well, there's a contemporary
Or
name.
Facebook. I think he's Facebook. Yeah.
Yeah, the guy on Facebook, his name is Ethan Siegel. He's one of the best writers of astrophysics and cosmology and science in general.
Yeah. So, he's somebody else I haven't investigated very much. In fact, it's a heavy topic and there's many to discover, but it's fun to talk about, especially people who have looked into it and watching YouTube videos about it. Lee Smolin says that time may be the fundamental thing. And if you think about it, because space is a bit variable, right? It's not but time seems to be that thing. You can't hit it with the club, it's in your pendulum, that analogy, Alex, right? It's in everything that we can possibly conceive of. It may be the most fundamental thing, time. Anyway, it's just interesting. I thought I would add that. That's Lee. And he also said that since we're kind of hitting a wall in our advancements in physics, I don't know if that's a true statement, but he said so. Some of the reasons and paradoxes we're coming up against is because we may have to redefine what we think time is. He thinks that might be one of the ways to get over the hurdle of the next set of whatever. Wormholes, here we come, right?
Time is what clocks measure.
Seems to
No
be.
two
That's a good
clocks
definition.
Measure time identically. Time is what clocks measure.
Strontium clocks, right?
Time is relative to space, and your position in space.
And you're
So-
moving through space.
Yeah, so time is just,
Space. A clock that's moving through space keeps time differently than a clock that's not moving through space.
that's the observation.
Time is the beads. Sorry.
The observer's point of view is in a different part of that space. That's why. And the electrons that are traveling to the observer from the clock are moving at the speed of light.
Photons.
So
Unless,
yeah,
unless they go through, unless they pass through
yeah,
Glass.
there's all kinds of there's
Ocean.
stuff going on there.
an
Water.
ocean. Yeah, water slows it down, and water bends
Or a
it.
black hole or a black white hole. What happens to time then? Ooh, I don't know.
I found a website that was talking about some wonderful aspects of water. They believe water was some kind of miracle.
You want to know how big a nanosecond is? That's how big a nanosecond is. It takes a nanosecond for a photon to get from here to here. That's a nanosecond.
That's a pretty good analogy. I like that's cute. And Josh also had a cute analogy with time was the prayer beads counting the sun's arc, right? That's time.
Yeah, I found out what an onosecond is.
That's
It's
a
the
person.
amount-
The guy's the clock clicking the beads, right?
No, the onosecond is the amount of time it takes for you to
Wow.
realise you've pressed the send
A
button,
bead.
but you've said something you didn't intend to say.
Oh, no.
Oh, me? No. Prayer's a thing.
How's Maxwell doing?
I was just gonna put something in the chat box. He's great. We are trying to get his best friend to have a live with him and you maybe next Sunday. I was gonna message you separately about that.
Super.
But he enjoyed it. He asked if we were gonna do it again this weekend.
Yeah.
But there's too much going on. So
Yeah. Two of my closest friends on Facebook said they loved that little segment, the 30-minute segment with Maxwell.
yeah, no, his best friend Weston is great. And I just talked to his mom. Hi. And Weston's mom agreed. She said, "Oh, let me talk to my son about it." And then, maybe next weekend, the three of you guys can get together. And of course, I'll moderate.
Super.
So
Excellent.
hopefully she'll come on. She's actually, she's a police officer, and so is her husband. Yeah. But anyhow, oh, cute. Well, I need to go, but I will message you directly. And I was going to write in the chat. It was a great conversation. I mean, everybody went all over the place, but I still feel like you guys achieved focus.
Great.
Bye.
What's this,
I
Alex?
always talk, but you
My-
can't talk yet. Sorry, bless you.
Yeah. It's very cute. Alex wrote something kind of funny. He spelt the word soul wrong as a joke. Colin's sole purpose is to make the non-believers feel better. Oh, that's nice, Alex.
Josh, did you have
Non-believers
some
feel
closing
better.
remarks that you haven't said yet?
No, I think Aya has some, but she hasn't learned to talk yet. She's like grabbing the phone, like, oh, wait, I got things to say. So we'll wait till she can talk, but I'm just saying goodbye because she's trying to, I think she needs to get an iPhone. We got to go buy her a subscription and get her into the social media world and give her Pinterest and all that stuff. So
Super.
yeah, we got to register in the database of the internet.
Super.
So I'm saying goodbye. Thank you guys for a great conversation.
Wonderful.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Closing remarks, Alex? You're muted.
I've been browsing through my images folder, so I'm just ready to go and have a sleep, I think.
Sleep well. Sam, are you with us? Do you have any closing remarks?
All right, Barry.
All
Have a
right,
good one.
then we'll return everybody to their Saturday afternoon. And I'll end the session.